Good afternoon. I am retired Admiral Denny McGinn, also call myself a recovering sailor, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Rocky Mountain Institute. We're here at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. to introduce you to a couple of our great team members, and they will be telling you about what cities are doing to become much more sustainable, but we're able in this wonderful conversation to touch on a whole bunch of areas that Rocky Mountain Institute is involved in really making a difference. Coming up with thoughtful ideas, trying them out at a small scale, and then scaling them up to city, state, and national level. So I'm joined by Carla Frisch and Rushad Nanavatty, and they are our experts in smart cities and a whole variety of other things. So, Carla, tell us about yourself. How did you come to this wonderful organization, RMI?
Well, thank you so much, and it's great to be here. I first got interested in RMI from the book, a classic, Natural Capitalism.
Right.
And then I had the opportunity to spend a summer at RMI in 2007 while I was working on my master's degree at Duke University, the Nicholas School.
Right.
And that was a really formative experience for me in thinking from a whole systems integrative design approach. And from there, I went on to work at the U.S. Department of Energy, where I was for 10 years in 3 administrations, working on research and development, working on national climate and energy policy.
What a broad spectrum of experience working for, I guess, the back end of the Bush administration, the whole of the Obama administration, and the beginning of the Trump administration. Tremendous span of experience there.
Yes, it certainly was. And I think I'm able to really build on that and have the opportunity at RMI to work with states and cities and businesses who are making huge leaps and bounds on energy and climate right now.
That's great. Rushad, tell us about yourself and how did you come to be part of this great team?
So similar to Carla, and I think similar to a lot of people at RMI, sort of the gateway drug, as it were, was reading Amory's stuff. Natural Capitalism, Small is Profitable, books like that I think did an incredible job of laying out what a rational energy system could look like, and continued to read RMI stuff over the years, and I didn't think there was anything more clear-eyed and compelling out there. So it was really RMI's thought leadership, and specifically this combination of applied hope. We're surrounded by a lot of sort of doom and gloom when it comes to the climate conversation, and it's not always helpful. So that combination of applied hope and very pragmatic, clear-eyed, market-driven thinking around business-led, market-driven solutions was what sort of attracted me to the Institute. And for someone who is interested in working on what I think is the existential sort of challenge of our time, this is a wonderful, wonderful place to be. The way I think about it is I think of RMI as being pound for pound, maybe the most influential energy-related organization in the world. We're small, but I think we punch significantly above our weight, and that's really the reason I was here when I was contemplating a career move. I spent several years in the consulting business,
right,
and then left to set up, inspired by some of RMI's thinking, a company that was developing renewable energy and distributed energy solutions in Southeast Asia. And so RMI has been in the background of my life for a really long time, and now I'm part of the family.
I love the expression you used, applied hope. I think that defines what Amory Lovins, our founder, has been thinking about for 37 years. I first met him over 30 years ago, and I was struck by the fact that the pragmatic solutions that you mentioned are able to, we are able to make choices, and it's not a zero-sum game. It isn't, you can have a good, healthy environment, or you can have a growing economy and a quality of life. You can have it all, and in fact, they're very, very synergistic. So in terms of dealing with smart cities projects and other things, Carla, What's your perspective on that? How are cities reacting to, on the one hand, the challenge of environmental concerns, especially global warming and climate change, but on the other hand, the tremendous opportunities that are created by meeting that challenge in the right ways?
Great. That's a great question, especially for this moment right now and where we are in the climate conversation. So I work on an initiative called America's Pledge. It's co-led by Mike Bloomberg, who used to be the mayor of New York City.
Right.
And it is...
That's a city, isn't it?
Yeah,
New York.
a major one. And the America's Pledge initiative is in support of states and cities and businesses who are making commitments and really following through on those commitments to reduce their greenhouse gases and to fight climate change.
Right.
And they're doing that for a lot of other reasons as well, for jobs, for the economy, to have the best future for their constituents, for their employees. And there's a coalition of the We Are Still In coalition, which now has over 3,750 members who've stepped up to the plate and made a commitment to reduce their emissions.
Right. So this all came about with the unfortunate decision by the administration to withdraw or intending to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. And everybody from private sector to public universities to individuals stepped up and said, we can meet those goals that came out of Paris, and we're going to do it in a way that's going to be good for business, good for local, regional, and global environment. So America's Pledge.
That's right.
Yeah.
So America's Pledge and the We Are Still In coalition was a direct response to that announcement of the intent to leave the Paris Agreement. And it really answered the question that a lot of people had, both here and abroad, is the U.S. still working on climate?
Right.
And the answer was a resounding yes, we are.
Right.
And then the second question naturally follows, well, do those efforts have significance? And that's where we at RMI, along with our partners, have been able to bring new analytical tools to bear to answer that question. And what we found is that those commitments by cities, states, and businesses, and the others you mentioned, including cultural institutions, artists, tribes, investors, counties, lots of different folks, a really diverse coalition. But their activities, their commitments can get us a good way toward that original commitment in Paris, even without the federal government.
That's great.
And what we're finding is that, of course, federal activity will be necessary in the long term.
Sure.
But there's been a resurgence of a conversation, a federal conversation recently, with discussions about the Green New Deal, the Green Real Deal.
Right.
And I think in Washington, that's where we are today, there's been a shift in the conversation and a real palpable energy around what is our national climate policy.
One of the great things I've noticed over the years about RMI and why I'm so privileged to be part of the Board of Trustees is that we're nonpartisan. We are all about applied hope and solutions that are based on real data, objective analysis, and we want to really, really make a difference. Tell us about your involvement in it, Rushad.
Sure. So one of the programs that I work on is the American Cities Climate Challenge. Also an initiative very generously funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. And the mission of that particular initiative is to help cities move further, faster on climate change.
Right.
Turn some of the commitments that Carla described into actual, on-the-ground, tangible action. And RMI's role in that initiative is to drive the renewables agenda. We run what we refer to as the Renewables Accelerator, as part of that American Cities Climate Challenge. And so helping cities, many of whom are very, very new to this game, procure renewables directly, promote or accelerate the adoption of those renewables throughout their communities, and increasingly and critically engage with their utilities, with their regulators to actually shift the energy system or accelerate the energy transition at a systems level. So that's our sort of specific role within that initiative.
That's great. I'm reminded of a story many decades ago. There was a bank robber named Willie Sutton that was caught by the police, and someone asked him, "Why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Because that's where the money is." Well, why do you focus on cities? That's where the people are. That's where so many people, not just in the United States, but across the world, moving to the coast, urbanization, and you can really make a difference with the kinds of organizations. Carla, your thoughts?
Right. Well, I think cities and companies, particularly small cities and companies, they have a real flexibility to be able to decide, this is a priority for us and we're going to make it happen. And then the great thing about that is they can test out different things and then share with their peers what's worked and what's not. And that's part of what we try to do at RMI is gather those learnings and provide our own unique technical and analytical expertise to help systematize those and really scale them, as you're saying.
Right. So we are joined on this webinar by folks from 40 different states here in the United States, as well as 20 different countries. Rushad, what are the areas that you're concentrating on, not just in the United States, but across the world?
As an institute?
Yes.
So I think, Carla and I alluded to the fact that we were drawn to RMI by its thought leadership. What's happened over the years at the institute that we've not only done the think, but we've also done what we refer to as the do and the scale. So
first you start by thinking about a problem, about potential solutions.
Yeah,
and
identifying the market-driven solution that makes sense from both a technical and economics standpoint.
Right.
Then thinking about how that solution gets implemented in the market. On occasion, there may be no actual direct evidence of that working.
Right.
And so then our role morphs into actually piloting and implementing those solutions, actually directly intervening in those markets to make them possible. A great example of this is the work that we do on energy transitions in island nations and small states. So we're not just writing a report, we're working very, very closely with governments, with utilities on actually implementing those solutions. And then there is the scale piece, which is, okay, now you've demonstrated that that solution works, how do you actually expand it to the rest of the market? And Carla's initiative, the America's Pledge initiative and this American Cities Climate Challenge are examples of that. We anticipate working with 100+ cities over the course of what right now is defined as a 2-year program. So we work across those modes of thought leadership, implementation, and scaling. And I think one of the unique things about RMI is, one, our whole systems thinking. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking to a city, for example, about putting in place a strategy to get them to 100% renewable energy by X date, you really, really need to understand the interdependencies and linkages between the electricity system, the transportation system, building electrification, and there are not many organizations that are quite as well placed as we are to understand those linkages. And then the other thing I'll say is that we're capable of, going onto the rooftop of this building and figuring out what the solar potential on it is.
I thought you were going to go up there right after this webcast.
We can do that. And then we're also able to sort of think about the strategy and being able to sort of provide that complete sort of range of thinking and identify that complete range of solutions from the very specific to the very broad is something that sort of makes us very well suited to the work that we're trying to do.
So it takes technology, it takes the right kind of policy and political will that goes along with implementing that policy, and then of course it takes finance. What's your experience been, Carla, in working in the cities area with utilities, traditional utilities? Are there changes that are taking place?
Yes. So I think now is actually a real time of change in the energy sector, particularly in the US, because there's technologies that used to be expensive maybe 10 or even 5 years ago.
Right.
And those costs are just coming down dramatically. Solar and wind, for example, also LEDs for lighting and batteries. And that's really changing the economics of the energy system. So actually, a CEO of the second largest utility in the US said on a shareholder call recently that just a few years from now, they'll be looking at a world where renewables are cheaper than some of the traditional large-scale fossil fuel energy plants, including renewables with with storage. So it's
Right.
quite amazing. And there's a real opportunity here as the electricity system becomes cleaner and these utilities are delivering cleaner and cleaner electricity, that we can use that clean electricity in our homes, in our
Right.
businesses, for our transportation, and eliminate emissions from those systems because we're
Right.
using clean electricity. That's in our homes for heating our homes, for heating our
Right.
water, for cooking, which also has a whole different suite of benefits for indoor air quality.
Right.
So these systems are really interconnected, and as you were saying, there's both an environment opportunity here and an economic opportunity.
Right.
So for those utilities that are seeing that clean energy future, there's a real opportunity for expansion, addressing climate change and addressing the broader environment all at the same time.
Right. I've heard the term quite a lot, and I've used it recently, electrification. Rushad, what does electrification mean in terms of cities or more broadly?
So Carla is actually probably better qualified to speak to this than I am, but what I will say is that this is not fully appreciated, but 30% of our emissions, of cities' emissions,
Right.
come from burning fossil fuels in buildings, 10% of emissions overall.
Right.
And we talk a lot about electrifying transportation, electric
Yes.
vehicles. We talk a lot about decarbonizing the electricity system through a combination of renewables and flexibility and storage. And building electrification, stopping the use of or the burning of natural gas and oil in our buildings is something that doesn't quite get as much attention, but there's tremendous potential because of how the economics have changed and how the technology has advanced with things like electric heat pumps, air source heat pumps and water heaters. So this is one of America's Pledge's priority initiatives, and in fact, RMI has just launched a building electrification program that is being led by Bruce Nillis, who formerly led the Beyond Coal campaign.
Right.
So we're turning our attention in the U.S. from sort of winning the coal end game, as it were,
Right.
to winning the end game against or starting this fight with respect to natural gas, which currently actually accounts for a greater proportion of emissions, quantum of emissions than coal in this country.
And I know that is because we're using more and more natural gas, but also because of things like methane leakage, and
Yep.
methane has a much more intense, although somewhat shorter duration on greenhouse gas.
Yeah.
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 Right, and from a cost perspective too, I mean, if you're building a new home right now,
Right.
it's cheaper for you to go all electric.
Right.
And it's cheaper for your town or your utility not to build out that gas infrastructure to your
Right.
home.
Sure.
So we're looking here again at the whole system.
Yeah, that's right.
But Denny, I also want to come back to your question earlier about utility and
Right.
perhaps regulatory
Sure.
engagement, and maybe draw the connection to the city's work there. I think the other thing that we've seen is cities waking up to the amount of influence and negotiating power that they have with utilities and with
Right.
regulators. Cities typically directly account for 5 to 10% of electricity load in many places, are often utilities' largest customers, and have a high degree of control over their building stock, which is the U.S.'s primary source of emissions, directly or indirectly, and
Right.
over streets, over parking, and city ambitions are quite often much more ambitious than the decarbonization goals that utilities are setting for themselves.
Right.
So they are in a position where they can actually very, very actively and effectively push utilities and regulators in the direction that we need to see our
Right.
economy and an energy system going. And we're still at early stages, but you're seeing this increasing appetite and willingness to actually attend a regulatory proceeding or engage directly with the utility and
Right.
have these discussions. If I wasn't here right now, I'd be with a couple of team members who are down in Atlanta advising the city on some of what they may want to bring to the table with respect to the resource planning exercise that Georgia
Right.
Power is undertaking.
Right.
So I think there's huge potential to build on these very sort of nascent
Right.
efforts and engagements.
My experience with utilities is fairly extensive. I'm on the board of directors of the Electric Power Research Institute, whose membership is utilities of all sorts. And it's really, really encouraging to see that a negotiation, for example, between a city like Atlanta or New York or wherever and the utility results in win-win outcomes.
Yep.
It isn't like the city wins and
Yep.
the utility loses.
Yeah.
It's because of looking at objective data, doing the analysis, you can come up with a situation that there's benefit to all the parties.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that really work and really have some staying power.
Yeah.
What's your experience in this regard, Carla?
I think that's exactly right, and I would just add the citizens to that example.
Right.
One of my favorite things going on in cities right now is actually in Greenville, South Carolina, where I was born. They are home to electric bus manufacturing facility.
Right.
And there was a small town nearby that was one of the first in the U.S. that had an entirely electric bus fleet.
Right.
So what you're looking at for the citizens is when,
Yeah.
when you're standing at the bus stop, or you have school kids, who
Sure.
are waiting to go to school, you're breathing nothing except clean air with those
Right.
electric buses.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you're looking at reduced maintenance costs, reduced
Right.
operating costs, and the all-around sort of win-win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody's ever sat or on a bicycle or in an automobile or even walked on a sidewalk next
Yeah.
to a big old bus with spewing diesel fumes, not good. And that's to say
Yeah.
nothing about the effect on global warming or
Yeah.
climate change, but just locally and regionally, the health benefits and the quality of life benefits are tremendous. And you mentioned lower noise as well. So
Yeah.
this business of electrification has a tremendous amount to offer.
Yeah. I'd perhaps even go beyond describing it as a win-win and saying that actually it's, if you want a competitive and healthy economy and you want to achieve your goals with respect to equity, you have to have a cleaner energy system.
Right.
You can look at this from the perspective of industrial competitiveness. China built 4 times as much solar power capacity in the last year than the US did. That represents essentially zero marginal cost electricity, zero zero priced electricity for decades to come.
Right.
That has a huge effect on industrial competitiveness. So if we're serious about industrial competitiveness, you have to care about this transition. The majority of African Americans in this country live within striking distance of a fossil fuel production or processing facility, which has profound impact and implications from a health perspective. So if you want to solve public health problems, it's an imperative. So I think it goes beyond just a win-win. It's almost as if you can't have one without the other.
If we asked a room of 1,000 people to raise their hands if they liked electricity, we'd see 2,000 hands go up. If we asked
And a couple
them,
of legs, yeah.
everybody that loves electricity and all of the wonderful things that it provides for us in terms of economy and quality of life, how many would not mind living 5 miles downwind from a coal-fired plant? I don't think you'd get too many hands.
Yeah.
But if you said, what about a wind turbine farm or solar or battery cells or what have you, it's this business of being able to produce the same kind of economic benefit, quality of life, but to do it without the indirect costs of adverse health benefits.
Right.
And you're so right, Rushad, in that if you want to be part of a really amazing economic transformation in the 21st century,
Yep.
you've got to be in green technology for all of the right reasons.
Absolutely. And American businesses get it. You have utilities across the country that are accelerating the retirement of their coal-fired power plants and building wind and solar instead, not because they're prompted by federal policy. Obviously, they're not prompted by federal policy right now. They're doing it because it just makes economic sense. You have, companies that epitomize our industrial economy, are some of the world's biggest car manufacturers,
Right.
including the biggest, VW, that have committed to basically going all electric by a certain date.
And this is
that's-
because it's
there's
in their
business logic.
business
Right.
interest,
Yeah.
in the best interest of their investors and shareholders.
Right.
And what we hear from businesses that are part of the We Are Still In coalition as well, I think this is fascinating, is that when they're trying to recruit top talent,
Right.
particularly new talent coming in,
Right.
the question that they're hearing is, okay, what is your business doing about climate change?
Right.
Like, what is your mission around the environment?
It's kind of an intelligence
Exactly.
test for an organization.
Right.
Do they get it? Do
Yeah.
they understand this huge challenge and the huge opportunity?
It is a huge opportunity, and I mean, it's right there in our mission statement. I love to look at my business card every now and then. And for RMI, driving toward the clean, prosperous, secure, low carbon energy future. So
Right.
really, all of those elements.
That's fantastic. You mentioned you'd done some work overseas, Rushad, before joining RMI. Tell us a little bit about that and how it relates to the work that RMI is doing today.
People who've been keeping vague track of RMI over the years probably think of us as Rocky Mountain Institute, as that name suggests, a Colorado-based think tank. But actually, our biggest program at the Institute right now is a program that focuses on the energy transition in emerging economies.
Right.
And there are huge, I would say, challenges and opportunities with regard to the energy transition in those countries. When you look at situations in Southeast Asia or in Sub-Saharan Africa or India or China, if these economies choose to take what in Amory's phrase would be described as the hard energy path of traditional fossil fuel and
Right.
grid infrastructure investments, it makes us, it makes achieving our climate goals that much more difficult.
Right.
What those programs do is basically try to offer these emerging economies alternative solutions that are based
Right.
on a combination of efficiency and renewables. And those could be microgrids in Africa, which is
Right.
what we're working on in Nigeria with the National Electrification Energy Agency over there. In island states, it's about weaning them off fuel oil and diesel and moving them onto a combination of wind and solar
Right.
and storage.
So basically what we're telling developing countries or pointing out to them through data and analysis, you don't have to go the same way that we
Yeah.
went in the Industrial Revolution and go back to the late 1800s and throughout the 1900s
Right.
and have an economy and a quality of life the way that we did it.
Exactly.
Skip it.
Yes.
Just go ahead and taking advantage of the
Yeah.
technologies that are increasingly more affordable, as you pointed out,
Right.
Carla.
Yeah.
Storage, wind, solar, geothermal, and energy efficiency.
Right.
And jump in there,
Yeah.
and then you're in an
Yeah.
information age economy.
And it's a critical moment in time because nobody's going to invest in a coal-fired power plant in the US today.
Right.
But there are 1,600 in the pipeline across the world.
Right.
Many of them in countries that have no coal today.
Right.
And policymakers and business people aren't necessarily aware of how much technologies have advanced and how the economics have
Right.
changed. And so stopping that 400 gigawatts worth of coal capacity coming
Right.
online in the developing world, I think is, from a planetary perspective, one of our biggest challenges.
And I think there's an opportunity here for RMI. We talked about this at a
Yep.
board meeting in Colorado not too long ago, to basically advise how to green such large geostrategic, geoeconomic engagements as China's Belt and Road strategy,
Right.
with a greening of it. In fact, I believe President Xi of China said that that was one of the goals, to have a cleaner, greener Belt and Road strategy,
Yeah.
using the kinds of knowledge that we can bring to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that makes us different and I think distinctive, in that these developments these investments in coal-fired power around the world are being closely tracked by a number of great organizations, and a lot of attention is being paid to them by advocacy organizations. I think what RMI is in a unique or very sort of capable of doing is actually presenting the alternatives. Not just saying, don't build that coal-fired power plant, but here are the numbers that show that there is a better alternative, and better, yes, obviously from a climate perspective, but also better from an economic and financial perspective.
That would be the applied part of applied hope.
Exactly.
That's right.
It's hoping and recognizing there's a problem and hoping it will go away is one thing, but then applying that knowledge and really taking the best technology, policy, and finance solutions is the way to go.
Leading with market-driven solutions, leveraging the power of the market as opposed to sort of trying to bypass it.
Right, and that sort of technical analytical expertise is what we're using as we work with the cities, states, and businesses who are part of the America's Pledge and the climate movement in the U.S. right now, as far as looking at what are the strategies that have the biggest GHG impact. Where can we really focus to get things moving quite quickly? The same as we're working with other countries, that analytical lens.
Right.
But we also bring the facilitation and the deep expertise of understanding people's starting points.
Right.
And as you were saying, sitting down at the table with folks in business or folks in the existing fossil fuel industry to understand where they're coming from and what are the solutions that would really also work for them.
Right. Trying to address that large coalition in ways that has meaning to the members of it, the key stakeholders. What's in it for me, and how is this going to benefit me, or what kind of a problem will it solve for me? 10 years in the Department of Energy, in the federal government, must have given you quite a perspective on how to work complex problems with many, many different people involved. How does that convey to the work you're doing with cities?
Well, thank you for that. Part of being a person who works in the government, as you well know, as an official, is really taking the time to listen to different constituents and understand where stakeholders are and what's best for the public good. So I think when we work with city officials, they're faced with that same question.
Right.
And really doing the listening and guiding solutions that will work over the long term for that population, that's growing and looking for sustainability, looking for jobs where they don't have to breathe toxic chemicals and work in a terrible environment, but really being part of that sustainable energy future. I'd add on the U.S. role there. We are a leader on that front. On climate, and this coalition, the America's Pledge and the We Are Still In movement, has helped express to the rest of the world the breadth and depth of activity on climate that is happening in the U.S. right now, that it continues to grow and continues to expand.
Right. Life is a team sport. It takes a lot of players with a lot of different skills, a lot of different experiences to actually make a difference and to move forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Rushad, do you see anything happening internationally in terms of America's Pledge? Obviously, COP15, the Paris Accords, was a pledge, certainly. Is that moving forward?
I'll turn to maybe flip that over to Carla, but I can also, I'd like to come back to your question about U.S. cities, but Carla, maybe you should speak to America's.
Right. Well, so we were at COP24 in Poland this December, and we had the opportunity. So often, the way it works in this international politics is a country government usually only meets with other country governments.
Right.
But we were able to set up several meetings with country governments as a coalition of civil society actors in the U.S. to share with them the incredible breadth and depth of activities that's going on.
Did you have a sign? Green States of America, or
we called it
like
the
that?
U.S. Climate Action Center.
Okay.
Yeah, big sign. But what's interesting is this same model of igniting a coalition and then bringing the deep analytic expertise to focus that coalition has now started in Japan. They have the Japan Climate Initiative.
Right.
And we're seeing that also kick off in Argentina in Mexico, in New Zealand.
Right.
So there's two different models there. One is if the federal government in a nation and the people are aligned on climate, they can work together on that. The model also works if the federal government and the people are less aligned. If the federal government's moving slower, the people that are part of a coalition can really help speed things along.
Right.
So it's a framework of engaging the population and bringing the analytics that works well in lots of different environments.
Sure. That's great.
Yeah.
Back to your
Yeah.
point about cities. Rushad.
So one of the things that I find sort of incredibly inspiring about working with cities in the US is just sort of the level of ambition and audacity that you see. Most cities have sustainability/energy teams
Right.
that comprise a handful of people, if that. In some cities, it's one person. And they are, you could say that the sort of, contrast that to the utility industry that spends, upwards of $30 million a year just on lobbying. Several utilities have multi-million-dollar lobbying budgets. And you're also sort of trying to figure out how to navigate the electricity system, which, experts have described as the most complicated machine in the world.
Yeah.
And these city sustainability directors and energy managers are undaunted. They're not naive about how difficult this is, but they are saying, what they say is, in the absence of federal action, we don't care, we're going to do it anyway. We're going to do the right thing anyway. And that, in some ways, it's a really, I think, uniquely American phenomenon. It builds on a tradition of individual and local action, regardless of, what's happening a few blocks away from here on Capitol Hill or 1 block away from here in the White House. And that's, it makes it very easy for Carla and I to sort of get up in the morning and go to work when your counterparts are people like that.
True.
You're saying there's some audaciousness in the RMI team,
Yeah.
as evidenced here.
Yeah, I would say so. That's probably one characteristic of the word that I quite often use, or phrase I quite often use to describe RMI people is passionate nerds.
Yeah.
Where, it's a deeply analytical organization.
Right.
But those analytical abilities are combined with a very, very deeply held value set, and passion for the work that we do, and that's, I think, a really powerful combination.
Let's talk about that passion. Carla, how do you convey a sense of urgency related to climate change and in accelerating this transition to a new energy economy, not just in the United States, but globally?
Right. Well, I think right now, all over the world and in the United States, we are feeling the impacts of climate already. We're feeling more extreme, more frequent weather events. One that particularly bothers me is the increase in mosquito and tick populations in the eastern U.S. This is a real thing that's happening now, and with all kinds of consequences as far as disease. So these are all the things that we want to avoid, the impacts. And we often hear about that in the news of climate, of this is what the future will look like if we don't take action. But what we like to do is sort of turn that on its head and really look at what's the possibility for a future.
Sure.
A future where we tackle climate change, where we've got clean air, clean water, abundant jobs, we have prosperity. And that's the kind of world that we're looking at and we're working toward. And I think we're really inspired to be part of RMI to take a step in that direction.
I like the expression, it's not just about preserving what we have, but actually restoring things like forests and quality of air and water and land, restoring it to better days that it had before we were so extractive of resources and everything. And I think that's an example of applied hope, certainly. Thoughts on that, Rushad?
Yeah, I mean, what was building on what Carla said, about the very real effects that are being felt here and now. It's when you talk to city staff and city leadership, there are reasons for doing what they're doing with respect to the energy transition and their sustainability efforts are varied, but they're personal, this is no longer an abstract problem that is, years ahead of us in the future. These effects are being felt today.
Right.
And so, you have the sustainability/resilience person in Anchorage who's an Iraq war veteran, talking about the national security implications. You have the sustainability staff in Orlando talking about resilience and rising sea levels at their doorstep, and the importance from an economic development perspective, because they've seen the impact that their local solar and energy efficiency efforts have had within the city. You talk to the Ann Arbor person, and she talks about her children and the moral imperative to act now. So it's very real and it's very
personalized.
personal.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to take a moment. I think we have a question or two that comes from our participants. This one comes from Ann Sewell. What can cities do to encourage or compel traditional energy companies to speed up the conversion of fossil fuel capital to renewable energy capital? We talked about this a little bit. Additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to point out is that, as I was mentioning earlier, is that cities' ambitions are more advanced, more radical than what utilities are proposing.
Right.
And because they are often utilities' most important customers, this really matters. So Xcel, one of the major utilities in Minneapolis, wants to get to 100% clean energy by 2050. The city of Minneapolis wants to get to that by 2030. Right? Atlanta wants to get to 100% renewables community-wide by 2035. Meanwhile, Georgia Power is talking about a renewables target that will probably get them to 15 to 20% by that date. So there's a mismatch in ambition, and therefore cities are in a position where they can and recognize that they need to be pushing their utilities to do a lot more. And I think they're starting to do that by showing up and making these arguments and making these demands of their regulators and utilities today.
And it's a really amazing number of cities and states and businesses that have committed to 100% clean energy. And that's a great first step of making that commitment. And then we are working with them actively to follow through and make sure those commitments become the reality and enable the future that we've been talking about.
One of the things that occurs to me is nothing invites success like success. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that the examples that cities that are a little bit further ahead than others, or companies, utilities, what have you, that Rocky Mountain Institute can show, this is the spreadsheet, this is the result, this is the business case analysis about why this policy, this technology works. Anything come to mind that particular successes, Carla?
Well, that's one we're working on right now on building electrification. New York State has a policy that part of their efficiency would enable electric heat pumps, which are super efficient and run on that clean electricity.
Right.
So we're working with other states and other municipalities of how can they build and design their policies to enable the future with that clean, efficient electricity.
Right.
Yeah. A great example is analysis that our electricity program has done, which has shown that when faced with increasing demand or increasing electricity load, a utility doesn't have to build a gas-fired power plant, a gas peaker. You can, in fact, meet those needs through what we describe as a clean energy portfolio.
Right.
A mixture of efficiency, demand-side flexibility, energy storage, and renewables. And we've made this economic case. We've shown how these solutions are, in fact, better from an economic and financial perspective. Now you have utilities still planning on building gas peakers, and this is where sort of we can add value. We can not only advise a city on how to ask the right questions, but we can provide them with the evidence that they can take to the utility and say, hey, you don't actually have to do this. The numbers show that there is a better way. And I hope that we can, I hope and anticipate that we will be doing an increasing amount of that kind of work going forward.
And this applies not just to coastal cities or large cities, but cities of all sizes, if you will, and all locations. Certainly in the internal part of the United States as well as on the coast, and clearly internationally as well.
Right, and counties and tribes as well.
Counties and tribes. Good point.
And you're seeing that, right? This isn't stuff that cities cared about necessarily 5 years ago. Even if they cared about it, they didn't really know how to act on it. And now you have a collection of relatively small cities, say in Tennessee, getting together and presenting a collective voice to the Tennessee Valley Authority. Writing a joint letter, ensuring that their voices are heard. And I think there's tremendous potential for that sort of bringing that aggregate or collective voice to proceedings like this, that we can help inform by providing the numbers, providing the analysis.
This has been a tremendous conversation. I hope that everybody that's on this webinar has had a good chance to understand the kind of talented, passionate, applied, hopeful people that constitute the team that we have, the growing team at Rocky Mountain Institute. I want to make a special thanks to one of our great, generous donors, Richard Landers. Richard is on this webinar, and he has pledged $100,000 challenge grant, basically for every donation that is new or increase about a donation that you've already made. Richard's $100,000 will match that donation. This is going to be available until the 20th of June, so I just really hope that we run the table on Richard's generous offer. But in conclusion, thank you for tuning in. For those colleagues or family members or whoever that weren't able to join us live, if you will, on this webinar, it's going to be available at a website that's probably on your screens right now. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's apply hope in effective ways that are based on objective data and analysis and really make a difference and create out of this tremendous challenge called climate change. Let's go ahead and make it the wonderful, wonderful opportunity of the 21st century. This is Admiral Denny McGinn signing out, and my orders are maintain course, increase speed. Thank you very much.